someone that you're sponsoring to want to have for a baptism, or if you're interested in being confirmed, making your adult affirmation in the Episcopal Church before the bishop or the congregation on his visitation, or there is also one other, if it's just someone who has done all those things, but they feel after some time in their life they just want to make a reaffirmation of their faith publicly before the church of the bishop. If you are considering one of those, I'd like you to put your name here, and then just next to it you could put confirm, receive, or baptized, and then either your phone number or email, okay? So we can get, if I need to get things to you, I can. So let me pass this around.
What's the difference between received and confirmed?
Yeah, and that was my next thing I was going to say. Okay, very good question. That's a great way to start, because I wanted to go kind of over that. Now, I think, because like Amanda, I think you're thinking about having the baptism for your two children, right?
For the kids, yeah.
Yeah, and then who else was talking to me about? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, sorry, I did.
Yes, it's right there, blending in. Also thinking about baptism. So we're looking at right now 3 baptisms. What a great celebration. The bishop, by the way, Bishop Hayashi, and this will be his last visitation as the Bishop of Utah. He's retiring, and he wanted to get in, and this last visit, he wanted to get St. John's in, he said. So, so it'll be a celebration, in fact, of what we're doing on it's during Easter season on May 15th. It's the 5th Sunday of Easter, May 15th. So that'll be a big day. And so and at the end of the service, the celebration we'll be having afterwards will be in celebration of those being baptized, confirmed, received, and also to acknowledge and thanking Bishop Hayashi for, his so many years of leadership in the Diocese of Utah. So so obviously kind of baptized, we know what that basically is about, and those are wonderful because actually, technically, I'll have to talk to the bishop. Generally, when a bishop is present at baptisms, when the bishop anoints with the oil, with the chrism oil at the baptism, they're technically baptized and confirmed. You get 2 for 1.
Wow.
But he may not always work. He may say, we'll do it this way and let them later do confirmation. So we'll find out about that. But one of the things when the bishop comes is the old traditional thing that we often would see in the Episcopal Church or in Anglican churches when we talk about confirmation. Some of you may remember there was the old traditional track. Didn't matter if you were ready or not, whatever. A lot of times at around age 13 or so, people who, and there wasn't always, there was, but in some places there was not a lot of always baptized. But and here's one of the slight differences. Like when I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church, and I was baptized. When I joined the Episcopal Church in 1983, yeah, that dates me. Okay. When I joined in 83, I chose to be confirmed instead of received. For me, it was, this is the place where I know I'm going to spend my adult life now living into my faith. And I want to have that confirmed. My baptism confirmed. The promise, the vows we make at baptism, I want it confirmed by the presence of the bishop, the presence of that apostolic. So I did that. Now, there are also, this used to not be available, but it was introduced as one of the, you've been baptized, and say maybe you were a member of the Methodist Church, and you had made an adult affirmation, a confirmation, that I don't really need to be confirmed because I already did that. Well, we say if people then, to join the church, you do not have to be received, but if you say, well, I've joined the congregation, but I would like to make that affirmation of, I'm joining the Episcopal Church. Cover a little touch on this, but the prayer that the bishop actually says over those being received is my favorite of all of them. I mean, he says, I receive you into this fellowship. May God the Father, Son, bless you, keep you, And, it's just this whole welcome and saying we celebrate you among us. So that's to be received because you've already, so most adults who have at least been baptized, they kind of have a choice. If you feel like you'd rather be confirmed, that's okay if you've never done something like that. But if you've done something like that and it's clear for you, say, well, I'd like to be received. And I could have done either one. Both are acceptable. It's your choice. So, and you don't have to make your decision right now. You think right now you might be interested in, and if it changes, we can deal with that. Okay? Did that answer that
Pretty vague, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
The difference, in the end is confirmation is to make an initial adult affirmation to the church.
So most of us have been confirmed like when we were little. Like
You did that and you feel though that you really have a need to, that you really didn't know and you want to do it, choose confirmation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're confirmed, then later on in life, are you received?
Say you've been confirmed and you've made an adult affirmation and it's been in a different tradition, church, then you're received. Yeah, because we're not going to say, oh, well, you need to repeat it. It's just like you don't repeat baptism.
Except in some places.
I know there's that talk about in Phoenix that is absolutely ridiculous and not really true to the Catholic and Apostolic order of the Church. Whether you use the word we or I, God is not dependent on our grammar. Thank God, because I'd be in real trouble if I was. Hey, I went to Louisiana Public Schools. You never know what I might say. I'll be saying, I ain't got none. Really, I might. So, or if I say reckon, it's a good word. So your difference is if you've made that adult affirmation. But I know there are some of those who maybe have been technically confirmed, but they've said, well, yeah, it was done and everybody meant well, but it wasn't what it wanted to be.
Okay.
But sure. Does anyone need to see this over here? Okay, all right. Alrighty. Now, let me just address one thing quick because, we're in Utah and we also have, here, we have people who come from LDS background. And I just want to say that when we have this class and when we talk and we kind of laugh and all of these things, and I just want you to know that by no means do we also have any anti-LDS. We do not, and we don't participate in bashing or the things with the LDS. Historically, from the very beginning, here in Utah, when Bishop Tuttle, the Episcopal missionary bishop, arrived here, one of the first things he did is he met with Brigham Young. And he came and he said, listen, I know there's some bad blood in history between you and some other people, but we're not here to participate in that. We're here to just find a way to live out the gospel and live that to the people who are here and whoever it is. We don't care who you are. And he said, one of the things we think we can do is not only have our congregations to help support, but we believe there's a need for more advanced medical care. So they founded St. Mark's Hospital in Salt Lake City, which many of you know is kind of like the big old hospital. So that was founded by the Episcopalians and said, because at that time there really wasn't a strong medical system. And here in Logan, when they arrived, because this was not originally really founded, it was a trading post before some of the Mormon pioneers arrived. When they arrived here, we saw that there was no education provided if you were not LDS. Because just think how things were in the 1800s. And they had their own schools, and if you weren't Mormon, you couldn't go. So they opened St. John's School here in Logan. It later grew and became so popular that many of the Mormon families sent their kids. I was like, I can imagine the talk that went on about that. They let them go to the Episcopal school. So there was St. John's School, and that continued until then it became a state, and then they developed a strong public education that was for everyone. So, and then they closed and said, let's do now what other things we need to do. So it hasn't been adversarial, and it's very clear. In one of my very first meeting with Bishop Hayashi, he said to me, he said, Jason, I will say one of my close friends over these last 12, 13 years is the president of the LDS. And he said, we respect one another. We have found ways where we can work for the common good of people and help. And he says, but we also know that the way he seeks to be faithful and the way I seek to be faithful to God takes a different path. And he said, obviously, I'm not going to walk his path and he's not going to walk mine, but we've learned to say that's okay. So one of the things, I want it to be a safe place where people who've been LDS, and I know, and it's predominantly LDS because of the area, but even for like me, growing up in a very conservative, fundamentalist thing, there was its own sense of culture and things that were similar. So there's other groups. There's some people who experience from the Roman Catholic tradition who felt this really tied in, and so they come here. And I want you to know, you're free to talk about the good, but also if you're saying, I really struggle because I could never ask a question about this or something like that, feel free to do that. And we all know that that's not where we're trying to condemn other people. That's just true to your experience. Okay? So just want to say, just kind of to say that because, I know there are some people, and I will just say personally, with the LDS church, obviously I don't agree with quite a bit. But I also know that many of them are seeking to be faithful as Christians the best that we know how. And I refuse to judge them as a person. So I always take that one of the heart of our baptismal vows when we're asked, will you respect the dignity of every human being? And we say, I will with God's help. Well, that means we mean it. So I respect them. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say that the way I introduced myself, it may have sounded bitter.
No, it was fine.
And to be honest, when I first started my journey, I really was. Steve and I had several sessions about this, and he told me one time, he said, try praying for them. He said, when you drive by a Mormon church on Sunday and you see all those people, just do the sign of the cross. Pray for them. If you see the missionaries, pray for them. And it has really helped. I don't feel bitter or angry towards them anymore.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. I really do. That's the one. I know I used to not want to ever go back to Louisiana because I didn't even want to go by a Baptist church. Because I'm from the South, you're automatically a sentimental sap. And, there's times where I want to go back, but it's a hate-love relationship anyways. I think a lot of people understand that. Yeah. Okay. What time did we start? I got to make sure.
10 before 12.
10 before 12? Okay, what time is it now? Okay, so
That was 25.
if you can let me know when we get up, because I want to, and this first one I know we're kind of starting, and we're going to go into some stuff here in just a moment, and then we're going to be focusing. I hope if you look on this outline, what I've put is, this is, for me, it's somewhat frustrating because I'm used to the things that I think that needs to be covered in an Inquirers type class or confirmation class and stuff is more than this. This is, I'm going like, this is, and I will tell you, in a sense, we're scratching the surface. Because in every area, there is much to learn. And what we want to do is offer opportunities after this to have things both adult and youth and children for people to then seek more in that formation, to then say, okay, well, we talked about that thing maybe about Scripture. I'd like to have a little bit more conversation about that. So, and we will. And if there are some of the things in this you go like, well, I got an intro, but I'd like to know more. Let me know, and that helps give me information about how we move forward. You'll notice we have, like today, we're going to talk about what are some basic Christian beliefs, what we call the outline of faith, or the other word, the Catechism, and then the creeds. Session 2, we will talk about Anglican and Episcopal Church heritage and history, and then after that, that'll lead into talking what is our structure and governance, and the church word you use for that is your polity. How do you how do you live, make decisions, how do you do things of the Episcopal Church. And in that, we then talk about how we are anybody know around the world about how many Anglicans there are worldwide? There's. Oh.
I was going to say, doesn't that depend on whether you count all the citizens of the United Kingdom?
Well, they have changed, yeah. I mean, technically, the weird thing about us as Anglicans, the Church of England really messes up things a lot. It is around the world. It is the only one of the Anglican churches that is a state church. And technically, when you have a parish, say you're at St. Swithin's on Leicester Street or something, one of those weird things. In a sense, the priest knows, and part of this I like, they serve geographically everyone. So anyone who comes to them, doesn't matter what the background, if they want a baptism, want this or this, you provide it for them, okay? So there is that element, and because they're to provide it for all people. But they have also began to say, realistically, what are really the members of the church? So they now have a little better counting system instead of just saying every citizen of the United Kingdom, or I should say England, because in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, it is different, that part of the UK. I will say, so there's a Church of England, and then in Wales, it's called the Church of Wales. It is also Anglican. When you go to Scotland, here I'm going to throw in just a little brief. I can't resist. I have to throw some of my. I love church history, but in Scotland, when all those centuries of battles between Scotland and England for independence and everything, and I will say I'm mostly Scottish, so I do tend to be biased. And the other part's English, so I'm always at war with myself. So, but when the final big battles that they had with the English king for Scottish independence, and the Anglicans in Scotland put their bets and their faith on Scottish independence and supporting the Scottish king. It didn't work out the way they hoped. When it ended, Scotland was defeated and became under the rule of England. Well, the King of England was pretty ticked off at his fellow Anglicans for not supporting him, but supporting the Scottish rule. So they were no longer the official Church of Scotland. He removed them, and even though he did not like the Calvinist Presbyterians, he then invited the John Knox to kind of come in, and they formed what they called the Church of Scotland. So the Presbyterian Calvinist is the official Church of Scotland, and it's the state church because the Anglicans chose the losing side. So they were St. Giles. If you ever go to Edinburgh, there's St. Giles Cathedral, which was the ancient Anglican cathedral in Old Town. And it's interesting because Presbyterians don't have bishops, so it's not technically a cathedral, even though they call one, because cathedral means seat of the bishop. That's what that word means. And the bishop's chair is called the cathedra. Okay, so you go there, but they don't have one, but they still call it the cathedral. And so the Anglicans went down the street about 10 blocks and then built St. Mary's Cathedral. So the Scottish Episcopal Church is there, and which I have to admit I love. And it's the only church in Scotland that's growing. The UK has seen a lot of decline. But around the world total, this is a close estimate, but there's around 78 million Anglicans worldwide. Now, and it's interesting, in the United States, it's pretty low. There's around about 4 to 5 million, and it's just like a lot of things goes up and down. The Episcopal Church of any has become really good about saying, let's not count what is not really there. So our counts are a little bit more realistic, and so ours look somewhat lower. The Episcopal Church has gone through ups and downs in the sense of, it used to be, of course, when the early colonies were all run under England, governed by England. The majority church, everybody was Anglican, pretty much. There were other churches, but it was the predominant group. And when you go along, especially the East Coast today, Episcopal churches are everywhere. And that's where the big bulk of in the United States. But it's also now there's areas where we've been traditionally have grown and thrived, of course, all along the original colonies. In the Deep South, a real surgence of the Episcopal Church, mainly for those who are looking for a place that is a little bit more maybe progressive than what is surrounding them. And then right on the West Coast, like parts of Northern California up to Seattle, really took off, and including even Los Angeles to this day. Before I came here, I was in the Diocese of San Diego, which used to be part of the Diocese of Los Angeles. To give you an idea how big, the Diocese of Los Angeles right now has something like 150 congregations. We in Utah have 38. Big difference in size, yeah.
What's a diocese?
Okay, and we're kind of already getting into some other sessions, but that's okay. And this is part of the thing is, here, let me just kind of say this here, because you'll notice that when I say under 2, there's the Anglican Communion that I just mentioned. That means around the world, anybody who is Anglican, who basically, every one of these churches has a book of common prayer. If you're an Anglican in New Zealand, it's a very popular book of common prayer. And on one page is in English, and the other page is the native, how do you say, Maori? Maori, yeah, on one page. They do that in the Book of Common Prayer of New Zealand. Canada has a prayer book. We have a prayer book. England, every one of them has it. And so that's one thing that we share. And we then, of course, share all the things about how we do things, how we live, our sacraments, and all of those things, okay? So that's worldwide. And then you have what you call the provinces of the Anglican Communion, which means all the individual national governing churches. Episcopal Church in the United States, Anglican Church of Canada, so on and so forth. There's also the Anglican Church of Mexico. So these are our closest neighbors. So that's the provinces. And then when you get, say, to your then local province, the Episcopal Church is made up of dioceses. And a diocese is a geographical area of a number of congregations who are under the leadership and authority of the bishop, the chief pastor. So in some places, it's the whole state. Utah is an example. The Diocese of Utah is all of Utah. That is a big geographical area, okay? Where Episcopalians have not been the most predominant, you'll see that, where they're big geographical dioceses. You go to California, there are 6 dioceses that make up the whole state of California. Diocese of Los Angeles, give you an example. San Diego, Diocese of El Camino Real, along Big Sur. Then there's the Diocese of California, which is San Francisco and all the area around that, huge diocese. Diocese of Northern California, the Diocese of San Joaquin, and there's another coming there too. So where they are, they break it down, smaller geographical, but to where you can handle that pastorally with the bishop, the clergy, the laity all together, okay? And then in every diocese, there are your congregations, like St. John's. And we're part of the diocese they call the northern part of the, obviously, of the Diocese of Utah. And we kind of work with some of those local churches. But the bishop is the chief pastor, and then of a diocese, and then that just all flows down. And we'll get a little bit more into how that kind of works, okay? And I'm going to give you a thing, actually, you're going to find out I like handouts. They are not tests. You may use them, or if you don't like them, it's okay. I won't be offended. You give them back. I'll use them for somebody later. But one is going to be showing the United States and shows how is the Episcopal Church lined out. It'll show you, you could look anywhere in the United States and go, oh, that's in the Diocese of Olympia, or, I grew up in the Diocese of Western Louisiana. Louisiana used to be just Louisiana, but then it got too much, so they divided it and began the Diocese of Western Louisiana.
Is the division based on population or area, or?
Yeah, if a geographical area is like, all of a sudden you've got a lot of congregations, I mean, more than, say, 38 or 40, and you've got more than that, and that geograph is so big, it doesn't work as well. So then they will divide up. And with a lot of states that used to be just one diocese, that's happened. Because pastorally, we can't provide the need, so you make a more workable area. Okay? So one of the handouts, so you can see in here the things we'll cover. And I said like the history, heritage, polity, and then also talk about what is the Christian or the church year, like your seasons, what are feasts and fasts, what are the sacraments, and what are the sacramental rites, things that we do. Then we'll talk about Scripture, the Bible, the Old and New Testaments. What are the types of literature that make up the Bible? And talk about that. And again, that you could spend 20 sessions on just Scripture, because there's a lot that we could really learn. I will say from my background, I'm one of those Episcopalians who feels comfortable holding the Bible. Sometimes we joke a lot as Episcopalians about, that, I get Episcopalians and I did it. I'm going to tell you now, so I'm not going to do it to you. When we get to the part of the Bible, and we'll have copies now, say, okay, everybody turn to 1 Hezekiah chapter 4, verse 20. And boy, people go through and they go like, I know it's over here near Isaiah, I think. It's in the Old Testament. And after a while, I'm like, okay, everybody stop. And I'm like, there is no book in the Bible called 1 Hezekiah. So I just said, see? We always don't know as much as we think we do. And don't worry, that was done to me years ago and I fell for it too. So, but there's a lot about Scripture, and also how do we approach Scripture, and we'll talk about that when we get there. What do we as Anglicans, what do we say and don't say, and how do we live into trying to be faithful? That includes the Scriptures. Okay? So we'll talk about that. And then we'll go into, I want to introduce the Book of Common Prayer, talk a little bit about how did we get it, what is it, and also then about its content, and does it matter or not matter, okay? And then we'll go into a part where we talk about the Apostolic orders of the church. And this is different, especially for people who didn't come from Episcopalian, like how do we order about, first, the most important thing for us is what we say, the baptized, meaning the church, because it doesn't matter if you're laity, a deacon, a priest, a bishop, doesn't matter whatever, those are roles. Your ordination vows are based on your baptismal vows. And I know I have a good friend, and I really like this, one of my old friends who's a bishop, who's the retired bishop of Missouri. He says, the day I celebrate the most is my baptismal day, not my ordination as a bishop, which people think, ooh, you bishop. So he's going to sell. He says, that's just to continue. My vows as a bishop is based upon what I did as my vows as a Christian. And we will say, for instance, like baptism, you're not baptized an Episcopalian, you're not baptized a Mormon, you're not baptized a Presbyterian, you're baptized a Christian. And then we then seek to, what I would say is like, okay, you may be baptized as a Christian, and you did that in the Episcopal Church, and this is where you choose to try to live out faithfully into what that means. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about the orders, like what's a deacon? Why do we have them? What is a priest? Really, I mean, I just give you a picture of me, priest, that's what it is. But it's like, okay, move on, check. And I'm a little weird, but and then about bishops. But really the focus when we get into that is all of us, the most important order that lives and does the ministry of Christ is the laity, the baptized. You're the ones, I'm only here to hopefully not to be an enabler for a bad life, but to help enable you to live into your baptism. I'm supposed to be as a support and a guide into that, not to do it for you. There's this old thing about, you'll find in the Roman Catholic Church, some others, and in the Episcopal Church, an old thing about, the priest, follow the knows best. Well, yeah, it does, actually, that's true. But there's this thing where sometimes, well, we hire this clergy and they're supposed to do the ministry for us for the church, and we just kind of show up. Well, if that's what you're looking for, you're going to be sadly mistaken here, because that's not what, I mean, there are things that hopefully I model and live into, but it's to help strengthen and provide what you need to live into your ministries. Okay? And I know for some Episcopalian that sounds odd because they're not always used to it. And then the last part of that is we'll talk about, and this one we may provide some other extra time if somebody has some particular things about prayer and worship, but things like the Eucharist. And the thing that really gets most questions is little things about ritual, custom, and symbolism. Like, because I know people who, Terry, she's our token cradle, and you're to say cradle Episcopalian. That means that they were born, they've spent their whole life in the Episcopal Church. They're a rare breed, like some dogs and things like that. But no, they're there and wonderful. But it's amazing people who've even grown up said, I've always seen this done in the service. Why? And for what reason? And, why are you doing this? Anybody see that happen in the service? I'll tell you yet. Make you wait. Just to give you the sense. So we'll talk about those things. So there's all those things that we will cover. When you leave today, I'm going to give you this thing that is it's meant just for your own enjoyment. It looks like a test. It's not. It's a part called What We Believe. And what it does is it gives you where to find the answer if you're, So I know, isn't that a great test? I wish the general ordination exams would have been like that. So it starts off like the first question, what are the creeds? And then, now I love it, we do our inside language, BCP, page 851. Okay, I'm just curious, do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say BCP? Wow, you're better than most Episcopalians. Let me tell you, she's gone on fast.
She's been studying.
Yeah, bulletins, when I came into the Episcopal Church, bulletins were not always visitor friendly. At the top, it would say something like, the beginning, the liturgy, the word, the word of God. And then there was opening acclamation, BCP P.355. What's an opening acclamation? We're Baptists. We don't acclimate anything. We just, as this goes, And then, what's this collect? Are we collecting something? Oh, they get to that money stuff first. I didn't have a clue. And then I'm like, what is this B? Let's see, BCP,
I had that experience as well.
Yeah.
We're going to the Anglican Church.
Yeah, they were like going, I was coming up with all kinds of acronyms, and so there was things that I didn't know I never could catch up to the page they were on. About the time I figured out where the Nicene Creed was, they were already into the prayers of the people. And then the first time I heard the Nicene Creed, I was like, ooh, this is interesting. Who came up with this? I said, this is pretty good. Who's this person, Nicene? I want to meet him. Whoa. And then I didn't have a clue. We didn't. You never used the creed in the Baptist church because it's the Bible. That's all you got. The Bible's better than Jesus, and all that, So I didn't have a clue, that there's this ancient thing because I kept going. Why hasn't my church found this? This would solve some of our problems. Because these people are crazy. So there's some things that we don't know. So that'll be a part we'll cover, and we can have fun with it too if you like. So who has who does not have a Book of Common Prayer? Okay, so I would be happy, would like to give, and any of you who wants one can have one. I got some brand new Book of Common Prayers to give out, and I would like to have anyone who's coming to the class to have one. So I'm not going to give you the paperback, silly. I'm going to give you a real hardback edition because you're special.
That's great.
Jacob bought me one for Christmas. That was Robin's plan, and then I got one.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anybody else would like that? Oh,
Great.
well, okay.
Are you giving out Bibles too?
Yes.
Are you giving them
Now-
that one in your
Are
office?
ex-Roman Catholics allowed to touch one of those?
Yes, but when I left the Catholic Church, I bought the John Wesley Bible. Is that not a good one?
Oh no. I get
I'm
it.
talking about like John Wesley from who was an Anglican priest
Okay,
who died an Anglican, not a Methodist.
okay.
And
So I made a good buy.
well,
Weird.
I've never heard of a John Wesley.
Well, it has all
edition.
his commentary at
Oh,
the bottom of
but
each
what
Oh,
one.
I thought you were going to say it's in red. What
I was like,
Jesus
did
said.
he?
I got one of those.
I was like, is it a translation? No. So
No,
it's
no.
got his notes.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, he's Anglican. He's good stuff.
okay.
So what version of the Bible?
Okay, I'll
Okay,
Okay.
that's your homework.
okay.
Is and that's I guess
I'm looking at my order here.
Aren't you clever?
now we all know and have heard that Jesus himself carried the King James Bible,
Yes.
and when he taught,
It's
the
eloquent.
disciples wrote in red ink, and
It was very helpful.
because I don't know, I grew up with a King James Bible, the Schofield edition, which is like the most fundamentalist, and what they also call the dispensational, if you want to get into theology. And it told you about how to understand when the rapture was coming and all that kind of stuff. And it was King James. And I literally heard people say, if the King James Bible is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. There's a little problem with that, I think we can figure out. You know, I don't know, just didn't have any access to the leather floppy Bible. And
CEB, Common English Wesley Study Bible.
that's okay. I mean, I do have the Episcopal Church does have even guidance about in worship what additions, translations of the Bible that are acceptable to be used in public worship. We do say for your own private reading, like there's one that sometimes I like reading called The Message. Anybody heard of it?
Vaguely.
Okay. The Message, and growing up in the South, there's things that I'm like going, I know exactly what he's saying, because this guy writes it in basically the language, instead of it's in Palestine, it's in the South, in America. So instead of the letter to the Romans, it's the letter to the people of Atlanta. I think it's and he says, and he just sometimes he'll instead of saying, and they felt that thou was not going, and he'll say like something like, and they said, get over yourself. Something like that. So there's something about it sometimes that it's very earthy.
It's Eugene Peterson.
Eugene Peterson, yes. Now, it is not a literal translation. Okay? And gosh, I'm jumping ahead. We're never going to get it. I'm doing 5 interlapping sessions today. But there are certain ones. But the main Bible we use is basically, the King James Bible, by the way, is based on the original Greek and Hebrew text, and it was called the Textus Receptus. I know it sounds like something else you need a booster shot for. And it's like, I don't want the Textus Receptus. But the Textus means it was the text that was received as the common text for authority. Now, at the time before the King James Bible that they used those Greek and Hebrew texts. At the time, they were using the most original and oldest text they could find in the Greek and Hebrew to make an English translation. Now, it's interesting. Since the King James Bible was written, there have been these huge, massive finds of more of these papyrus things that actually are hundreds and hundreds of years older than they had, that's closer to the original. And the closer, you get to the original, the more kind of accurate you kind of get. Because if we copy and you copy a copy of a copy, things happen. And so what we have now is called the New Revised Standard Version. Because the King James Bible was called the standard. It was the standard for English speakers. Well, it's no longer the standard because, first of all, King James Elizabethan English is not the English we speak today. And some things don't mean what they meant back then. And I'll give you one example. There's a part where Jesus is going on the Sea of Galilee with his disciples. And they're going across, and he says to them in King James language, "Let us fetch a compass." What does that mean? Get a compass? Okay.
Does that mean get a direction?
You get closer. Okay. You can see there might be a problem because first time I saw that, I said, "Oh, Jesus wants a compass. He's lost." Gosh, that's a first. He can walk on the water, but he didn't know which way he's going. It's like, bless his heart. And it is an old English nautical term to turn around and go back. So, in newer editions, doesn't it make sense? Would Jesus say, let us turn and go back to the shore? Does that make more sense? Mm-hmm. So it's not that the King James is bad, but the language is because English continues to change. So in the New Revised Standard Version, it will say, let us go back and go to the shore, which is what he really said in that. Okay, so that's how that kind of works. What we use in all of our worship service is the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is based on the King James, but with even more updated text that are older and more original. So we just, as you find stuff and it's good, you use it. So that is read for public worship in almost all mainline churches. If you go to the Methodist, the Presbyterian, the Episcopal, the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, and actually the Roman Catholics, they also will use this version, but a lot of times they'll also use like the Jerome Bible or one of the other editions. But we all on Sunday, almost all of us have the exact same readings too. It's called I'm completely off here. I'm going, because that's the lectionary. That's a whole other thing. So that's the thing about the Bible. And the Bibles that I have, and I have others, this is the New Revised Standard Version. Now, we didn't quite have money to buy some really nice ones. This is kind of small print. But if you don't have one, I'm very happy to give you one. Now, I'll get more into this, so let me just say up front, and I'll say more when we get to the Bible. The original 1611 King James Bible included what we call the Apocrypha. Mm-hmm. Those extra Old Testament books, those were originally in. But through the whole, what we call the canon of Scripture, meaning what is the guide, the official thing, over the last 2,000 years, that, depending on what century you had books in and out all the time. They didn't come to what they call the final canon of Scripture, saying, okay, these are the books we think we really should be in there. That didn't come till almost 800 to 1,000 years after Christ. The church was still wrestling with some of those things. So, and I'm wondering who set up the committee to make this decision. But it happened over thousands of years. So if you get an edition in Roman Catholic churches, it just includes all of the Apocrypha book, like Ezra and some of the others. Anglicans, because we are part of that kind of Catholic Apostolic order, we use them, but what we do is we do put them in after the Old Testament in a section and say, this says here, the Holy Bible with Apocrypha, you love all these words, the Apocryphal Deuterocanonical books. That means these are added to the canon, and the Apocrypha are the group of those books. So it just says they're included in here. So Old Testament, New Testament, and the Apocryphal books. And we do use some readings from them. And it's interesting, some of the people say, we don't do that Apocrypha. And it's mainly because they just don't want anything that has anything they think to do with the Roman Catholic. And it's usually extreme Protestants like Baptists. And they didn't bother to ever take a look at these, because if they ever did, there's some of the strongest texts that lead to this thing about what the Messiah is supposed to be in Christ. So sometimes I need to get over that.
Do you know why they left him out?
There was at one point, there were some of the editors that were into the 16 to 1700s who said, we're just not going to put them in. And all of a sudden, that they just weren't in some of the, because they were originally, because people say, well, no, I want the King James Version. One day, I actually worked during college, I worked in a Christian bookstore, and I had an actual real edition of the 1611. And I said, okay, you're so into that. Here, take one. Look at that. Well, wait a minute, this has got in here. This can't. I said, no, it's original. And they were like, well, that Apocrypha stuff is in it. So, but it was. But at some point, some of the more Protestant scholars said, we don't want those in there. And all of a sudden, we just didn't have them. It's kind of a strange thing. Nobody really knows a lot of the reasons. Anybody would like to have a copy or an extra copy? And sorry, I know this. It's pretty. I use one of these a good bit all the time.
Newer people want one, I can wait.
Oh, okay. Like, anybody else want one? Okay.
I'll grab
well,
one downstairs.
I'll grab you one downstairs. Oh, that's right. I even had, wow. I forgot they had even extras here. Okay. Sure thing. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping me find that.
Dad always taught me to change the
There you go. There you go. Okay, what time is it?
It is 12:59.
So,
It's 1.
okay, all right. All right, and I'll go, because this won't take much time, but the thing about, let me look here, where am I? In the Book of Common Prayer, if you look to page, let's see, I just want to make sure I tell you the right page here. Here we go. And I'm going to follow up next week with just a little brief intro, and we're just going to get right into it and focused into that, and we'll have all the introductory stuff. In the Book of Common Prayer on page 845, there's a thing called an outline of faith, and it says commonly called the Catechism. Catechism means this is a book of beliefs for those who are seeking. And it usually, in the very early church, those who were preparing for baptism, so technically, like Amanda, you all are considered catechumens. Because catechumens are those who were preparing for baptism. And they would study then the catechism for catechism. So it would be where the leaders in the church would sit down and say, here's what we believe as Christians. Remember, during the early times, it was very new for them. So what this is, it covers what is it we believe. Now, this starts in the most basic way. So if you're starting off about saying, what do we believe? Well, first of all, we believe as Episcopalians and Anglicans, what all Christians share, and here there's a little nuance because of where we are, that when I say that, it's saying that we share in the historical and apostolic, meaning going back to the apostles, what has been considered the orthodox of the faith, back to the apostles, of what it means to be a Christian. And that's also really defined in what the creeds are. The Apostles' Creed was the earliest affirmation of what it is to be a Christian. It was used in the very early church. All the parts of the Apostles' Creed were part of that catechumen about teaching. And it's called the Creed of Baptism because when they were baptized, they started saying, well, let's put together condense what that is. I believe in God. I believe in God the Father and the creator of all the things, and this one God who then, and comes to us through the incarnate word, Christ and Jesus and the Spirit, and then saying, Jesus died, he was crucified, he descended to the dead, and then he rose again. And then it then goes on to basically affirm what happened and the Spirit came. It says, I believe in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The word Catholic means universal. So at that time when people said, I'm a Catholic, it meant I'm just part of the church. I'm the church. Because that was a term for Christians, the Catholics. Now we've kind of got a thing, because what you would say now is, see, we say we are Catholic Christians, but we're basically kind of English, Anglo-Catholics. People who go to, under the authority of the Pope, would be Roman Catholics. Now, we don't always use that word because a lot of times it's a loaded word and people are, oh, what does that mean? And typically, Anglicans consider ourselves, in a sense, we're Catholic, but we also embrace the basic premises of Reform. It's interesting, most of those basic things that we affirm, the Roman Catholic Church has almost affirmed now, almost all of them. That the liturgy, because Anglican Reformation was based on certain things, that said that the liturgy, the worship, should be in the language of the people. I mean, why not understand what you're doing? Duh, that's a novel idea. So the language is and that the scriptures should be provided freely to all people, and it is not just the area and the ownership of priests and others who know Latin. So that was began. Then it said the Eucharist. Eucharist means Thanksgiving. The Holy Communion, when we come to the Mass, we come and that the baptized, the people, not just the priest or the bishop, everyone should be offered the bread and the cup. Used to, they didn't get either. Then finally, under like Roman authority, they started letting laity have the bread. Now, they also, the cup and the bread is available to everyone. That was part of Anglican things. We also said in the ancient church, those who were ordained to holy orders as deacon, priests, or bishops were not required to be celibate. They weren't. If you go back to the early church and the early bishops of Rome, they had their kids running around the early version of the Vatican. Can't imagine that today. But it was different. And but there were, and like for us as Anglicans, we like the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Roman Catholic Church, we do have orders of those who choose to be in a community. So monks and nuns, we do have them. So like there's the Society of St. John the Evangelist, what we call the Cali Fathers. It's a men's order. They wear the black habit and everything. Their main house is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they take a vow of celibacy, but it's because they choose, not because they kind of feel, well, I gotta be celibate, might as well just join a group with other celibate people, which is not maybe the best reasons to do it. So, and then we have women's or we have nuns. But, because the whole decision about celibacy, by the way, was made by one pope, Gregory the Great, he was really big into monasticism, which is a wonderful thing. But he just said, hey, I think it's great. I'm the Pope. Now, okay, everybody now on, you got to be celibate. Can you imagine you're like, huh?
Wasn't there also an aspect of trying to prevent people from turning their church positions into inherited offices?
Yes. It was thus because there was a lot of, yes. We get in church, there were too many things about if you were priests and stuff, there was things in bishops and others that were connected to politics and all this and land ownership. And the church finally said, no, what you have is the churches. And you no longer, because if you do have land, it now belongs to us. And if you're celibate, you didn't have to kind of worry about that. But there's a lot, that's a good point. There's a lot of, So if you choose to be celibate, you can, but if not, so our priests and bishops, everything can be married and we have relationships. So those are some of those things. In this outline of faith, you'll find that this follows in the sense of both theological and philosophical. It starts with the basic. What it starts with there, by the way, you'll notice on that first page, I'm sorry, I should have just given every one of you one of these. And next week, I think I'll have a copy laid out in a little bit bigger print. It starts off with human nature. It begins by asking, who are we? I mean, sometimes you have to ask good questions. I like the way this does. It lays out a sense in it asks a question. It offers a basic answer that is not supposed to be finite, that you never can question, but hopefully to lead you into searching more in your faith. So if it says something like, what are we by nature? Answer, we are part of God's creation, made in the image of God. Okay, that's nice. You might lead you to the question and goes, well, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Aha, second question. And by the way, if you want to be really theological and impress somebody, you can say, the image of God means the imago Dei. So you can use fancy Latin to impress, but there's whole courses on just what that means, and so forth. So that can lead you into others. And so it asks them about really, well, who is God? What do we say about God? Or what do we say about the Old Covenant, the Ten Commandments? All of this stuff is in here. One of the things I think, if you would before next week, read through this. It's not that big. Read through it. The Outline of Faith, the Catechism. Okay? So do that, and then we'll just address that quickly and then move on next week. The one last thing about the creeds, I mentioned like the Apostles' Creed, and if you notice, it's used whenever we're reaffirming our baptismal vows and worship. We use the basis of that whenever we do that in the church. But on regular Sunday worship, you'll notice after the sermon, there's always the Nicene Creed. Now, I know I didn't grow up using the creeds and so forth, and I know if you come from an LDS background, you don't have that, and that's kind of a weird, like, well, what is that? But remember, and I'll end with this, the Nicene Creed came about in 325 AD. They met in the town of Nicaea. What was happening? The church just exploded in those first 3 centuries. And it was moving into places outside of Palestine and Judea. It was going all into places of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, over to Greece. And things began to happen. The more and more people came in, and the early believers, some people said, well, I don't know. I don't know if I believe what the church teaches about who they say Jesus is. I think he was just God. And then you had some, no. He was just a man, I think, who was kind of more like a teacher prophet. And then, like, you can see where this is going. We don't know really who do we say Jesus truly is. So you then finally, in 325, some of the heresies, those who were purporting things that the early church, the apostolic faith, were purporting, wasn't that, and they were causing more dissension. So basically, all of these bishops, very early, 325, think about that, they came together and they basically had a knockdown, drag out. They really did. Everybody thinks this was a very polite get together. Let us discern what is right. There was one bishop who popped another bishop in the face, actually. There's some recording of church history. I know it's but things happen. People get heated up. But in the end, they came together and said, this is a sufficient statement of faith of Christianity. So that council said, and if you notice, it's based on what do we say, who God is, and how God is manifest in our lives. So, and the reason it's put after a sermon was if you ever had, especially in the early church, say you had some guy who wasn't really buying into it, and he was wanting to say some weird stuff. So if you got a really sermon that sucked, you always had something that you said afterwards that would say, well, this is what we really believe anyway. It's kind of saying, well, bless his heart, that might have been good, but this is what we believe. So now, in fact, when it comes down to, in the end, when you say creeds and what we believe as Christians, it has always been said among us as Anglicans, when people say, well, what do you, a lot of this belief, they said, when it comes to the basics of Christianity, we say the Nicene Creed is a sufficient statement of faith. We don't do a lot of big dogma and canons and say, well, also that means you better do this and this and this and read this 700-page volume. No. we say it is a sufficient statement of faith. Now, what that means, that's where you start. And then you figure out what does that mean for me and how do we live into it. I'm going to leave it at there. Read over that outline of faith. And if you can, I probably know the Nicene Creed pretty well. And maybe look over the Apostles' Creed. And next Sunday, we'll touch base on that one thing I said. And then also I'm going to tell you about one other creed and some historical documents that are in the back of the prayer book. Thank you. I know this was kind of long and hot, so extra stars. Thank you.
Will you pass out those forms?
Oh, yeah, this is the thing. Yeah, and the answer, it says BCP. That means if you want to see what it is, you can look it up in the Book of Common Prayer.
I do.
Oh, so that's what it is. Okay. I'll do this quickly so you can. All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I know
you.
there's a little bit of jumping around today. It's always in the first intro, it kind of happens that way, and that's okay. And then we'll get going on this. Like I said, there's so much that we're going to begin exploring that I think will hopefully facilitate further conversations and study. Again, thank you so much. This is just to make you feel